Hello everybody, we are going to discuss about ionic and metallic bonding. This is part of our unit 12 and we are going to discuss about the different types of bonds. We'll start by discussing ionic bonding. And the title of this lesson is centered on why do atoms of elements form bonds? Why do atoms of different elements form chemical bonds? So the objectives of this lesson are, number one, we need to understand the meaning of chemical bonding. Number two, we need to understand why do atoms of elements form chemical bonds. Number three, we need to know the different types of chemical bonds. Let's move on to bonding. Basically, when we say bonding, we are looking at a relationship between two atoms. We are looking at a relationship between two items. For example, bonding is a general formation of a very close relationship. In our life, we can talk of a relationship between a mother and a child, a boy and a girl can have a close relationship. That is what we call bonding. But in this case, we are talking of atoms. It means they are going to become close to each other and they are going to have a relationship. So chemical bonding is a form of attraction that occurs between atoms or ions. And this bonding enables the formation of molecules and compounds. Atoms of elements combine with one another so that they can become stable. So we'll move on to discuss about the issue of stability. And here is an activity. Before we proceed, let's consider chlorine and argon. Chlorine has got atomic number 17, argon has got atomic number 18. And these are atoms of period 3 elements. In the periodic table, considering these two elements, question number 1 is, which of these two atoms is more reactive? Which one is more reactive? Question number 2 is, suggest the reasons for your answer in terms of electronegativity and electronic structure. Electronegativity is the ability to attract electrons. Electronic structure, we are looking at the electronic configuration, how the electrons are arranged. The last question is, choose between chlorine and argon, which one has a lower energy potential? Those are the 3 questions. We can discuss in pairs, we can discuss in group and try to answer these questions. And shortly, I shall give you the answers to these questions. Okay, let's move on to the answers to the activity. Number 1, we find that chlorine is more reactive than argon. Chlorine is more reactive than argon. B, the reason why chlorine is more reactive is chlorine is unstable. It is unstable because it has 7 electrons in the outer shell and it requires 1 electron to be stable. And chlorine is more electronegative than argon. Chlorine is highly electronegative. On the other hand, argon is stable. Argon has a full outer shell and is less electronegative. The last question, we'll see that argon has a lower energy potential than chlorine. Argon has a lower energy potential than chlorine. Let's move on to the next part. And why do atoms of elements form bonds? Okay. Most atoms of elements contain incomplete shells. It means the shells are not full. They don't have 8 electrons in their outer shells, and those atoms, we say they are unstable. So for them to become stable, it means they have to receive electrons or they have to give away some of the electrons. The atoms of most elements form chemical bonds because they want to become stable. So they become bonded to others by receiving electrons, by donating electrons, or by sharing electrons. And when they form bonds, they create forces of attraction. And the electric force of attraction between the atoms, they make them stick together. Let's move on to the different types of bonds. We have two main types of bonds, two main types of chemical bonds, ionic bond and covalent bond. Let's look at an ionic bond. This is a bond which is formed when an atom donates its outer electrons to another atom so that both atoms will gain stability. And this type of bond is usually formed between a metal and a non-metal, whereby a metal donates the electrons and the non-metal receives the electrons. And a covalent bond is basically a type of bond which is formed when atoms share electrons so that they can be stable. Atoms, they share electrons so that they become stable. Basically, covalent bonds are formed between non-metal atoms. They are formed between non-metal atoms, whereby they share electrons and no atom is going to donate or receive. Instead, they are going to share the electrons. And the last part is on stability and potential energy. Atoms with incomplete shells, or atoms that have got shells that are not full, they have high potential energy. And basically, we say they are more reactive. They have high potential energy and they are reactive. For example, elements like sodium, the outer shell is incomplete and sodium is more reactive. And atoms that have got full shells, we say they have low potential energy. They are less reactive. For example, group 18 elements or noble gases like argon, the outer shell is full and they are less reactive. They cannot easily react. They cannot receive or donate electrons because their outer shells are already full. Atoms form chemical bonds to achieve lower potential energy because at lower potential energy, they are more stable. Okay. Let's move on to the gain of stability by losing or gaining electrons. We know that an atom can lose or gain electrons or even share electrons through bonding to achieve an outer shell which is full. And at the end, the atom is going to form a compound, and that compound will be more stable than the individual atom. And an example is sodium chloride, whereby an atom of sodium is going to donate an electron to an atom of chlorine, and compound is going to be formed. And the compound consists of sodium ions, positive ions, and we call them cations, and also chlorine ions, and they are negatively charged, and we call them anions. And the force of attraction is going to be experienced between the sodium and the chlorine atom. We move on to the octet rule and the duet rule. Basically, an octet rule can be explained as the tendency of an atom to prefer to have 8 electrons in the outer shell. That is by receiving or donating electrons. An atom has a tendency of having 8 electrons in the outer shell, and this is what we call the octet rule. And this can occur in atoms like sodium, chlorine. Then we have the duet rule, and this is only applicable to just 2 elements, and those elements have got a tendency to prefer to have 2 electrons in the valence shell or the outer shell, either by donating or receiving. For example, if we take hydrogen, hydrogen has got only 1 electron. It has a tendency of receiving another electron so that it can have 2 electrons. Lithium has got 3 electrons. It has a tendency of donating 1 of the outer shell electrons so that it ends up with 2 electrons in the outer shell. That is the octet rule and the duet rule. Okay, this is an exercise that we are going to attempt in pairs. And this is the end of the lesson. Thank you. Murakoze cyane, ndatenda.